Oh, hey guys! This is Patrick from Ground to Dust, doing a little video about some creative methods that you might find helpful. These are approaches that open up creativity. Are they a one-size-fits-all? No. Is this a, hey, here's a great idea of a thing you can do in your song? Probably not. But is it a, hey, here's something you can play around with and possibly figure out a cool thing to do with it? Absolutely. So for these examples, I am working in Ableton. I don't know other DAWs well enough to say that you can or cannot do this in other DAWs. You can do it in Ableton, and I am approaching this as a methodology that may be applicable to you, but it may not. So, take that under advisement. Here we have a 4-bar note just holding an A, and it is going through an arpeggiator at 16th notes and a fully randomized velocity. So this is playing 16th notes of the A note and then randomizing the velocity anywhere between 0 and 127. So what is happening next is we have an instrument rack in Ableton, and on every chain of the instrument rack, I have a different soft synth, all VSTs. So how I did this was I created an instrument rack. I added multiple chains here in the instrument rack, and you may need to use little buttons here on the side to set up these options. To add multiple chains of synths and potentially, post-synth plugins. And then I set the velocity ranges of them. With 4 of them, I picked 1/4 each of the full 0 to 127 velocity range. So roughly 32 velocity ticks each. If it was just 2 of them, I'd do 64 each. If it was just 3 of them, I'd have to actually do math, and I don't feel like doing math right now. So we have here a Mini V3, a Serum, Massive X, and Synplant 2. Additionally, each of these is going first through a velocity fix of 64. So it's mapping every velocity to 64. They're coming in utterly randomly between 0 and 127 to every instrument. It's categorizing them by these ranges, but then it's fixing them to a 64 value, and then we are randomizing it a bit up and down from there. So the velocities are coming in more or less around the range you would play them after they're mapped to the 4 different synths we're playing. After the chain, no matter which synth it's going through, they are then coming to a compressor, sort of at a mix glue type settings, flare for a little stereo flange, whatever, and a slight bit of overdrive distortion, whatever, and then a little bit of delay reverb, whatever. So randomized velocities mapping randomly to 4 different synths. Then we're sort of standardizing velocities a bit to be a little more like accurate to how one might play, but it's 4 different synths that are then going through a combined chain. What does this sound like? Okay, well, let's find out. So that is one creative approach. This MIDI channel, whatever you put in it, is being mapped to multiple different synths based on utterly randomized velocity. So, while yes, I have sourced this from just an arpeggiator, if I turn the arpeggiator off and just play, you can use this arpeggiated as I did here, or for a MIDI track you've performed or programmed or whatever. Like it's just an idea to have a line of notes going to a randomized set of sound sources, and then we bring them together by running them through a combined chain of consistent sound effects. Okay, so that's experiment number 1. Experiment number 2 involves an adjustment to that where we have one single synth, again playing just an arpeggiated A note, but instead of a randomized synth patch, we have a randomized effects chain. So one synth patch is being randomized through multiple different effects chains. So in this case, I didn't divide up velocity ranges. In chain mode, in an audio effect rack in Ableton, you can set up chains to controller values, essentially. And so I currently here have 3 chains. Chain 1 here is Dirt, which is in sort of overdrive distortion thing from Native Instruments, and then some cluster delay by Minimal. Chain 2 is Byte, which again is a sort of bit distortion by Native Instruments, and then Replica, which is a delay / reverb. And then chain 3 is Freak, which is a sort of combination amplitude modulation, ring mod, frequency mod, plugin, and then some OTT, because, why the fuck not? So I have 3 different audio chains here, each set to a different sort of controller value of 0, 1, 2, 3. Then in Ableton, I set this LFO. It is at every 8th note. It is going a 3% modulation range, which the 3% doesn't actually equate to anything, but it basically, these settings amount to enough to switch randomly every 8th note between these 3 controller values. So it's one synth randomly switching between 3 effects chains. This particular implementation is not particularly impressive, but the idea of I will take a synth and randomly map it through multiple different effects chains and switch between them on some sort of regular basis does create interesting creative opportunities. Finally, what I did here with the final one of these was combination of both. We are randomly switching between four different synths based on randomized velocity, and then switching between 3 different effects chains randomized every 8th note. Again, this is not necessarily any sort of like, oh, do this and it sounds awesome, or hey, here's a shortcut to a wonderful creative idea. It's more like these are tools in your toolbox to use and maybe pull something awesome out of. But like that, what I just created here was not necessarily good or awesome or great. I don't see myself using it in a song, but it is a wrench in my toolbox, a hammer, a screwdriver. I'm just saying stupid shit at this point. So, all right, let's move on to the next thing. So this is an alternate version of sending a MIDI channel to different soft synth / effects chains. So here I have a MIDI channel. Let's throw some sort of plugin on here. Native Instruments FM8. Okay, sure. Why not? And let's pick some sort of synth lead. What's this one sound like? Okay, sure. Why not? So let me write a sort of generic 1-bar loop of this synth lead. So what I can do here is I can duplicate it. And throw in a different synth. And duplicate it again. And again, pick a new synth. Something like this, I guess. And then duplicate it again. And pull up a new synth. Okay. So I have now here 4 MIDI channels going to 4 different synths, all playing the same line. So I will freeze track, flatten track, freeze track, flatten track, freeze track, flatten track, freeze track, flatten track. Okay. So I have now here 4 frozen, flattened audio recordings of 4 different versions of the same line played through 4 different soft synths. So I'm taking this loop of audio from the arranger view over to the session view. Second track, arranger view to same channel in the session view. Third synth, same session view track. Fourth synth, same session view track. So here I have audio from synth 1, audio from synth 2, audio from synth 3, audio from synth 4. They're playing the same MIDI line through 4 different synths. Now they're on one audio track. And I am setting their launch settings in Ableton to legato. And let's say every 8th note, they will switch to other. So every 8th note, they will switch from the audio file they're playing back to a different audio file they're playing back, but at the same point in the sample. That's what the legato button does. So they're playing the same riff and syncing same place in the riff, but they're switching files every 8th note. Here's a version where I did this. This is from a couple years ago, but this is where I implemented it. So I have multiple audio prints of a MIDI line through multiple different synths and effects and everything. And so if I hypothetically color these each different colors, and then record them, you can see that so it is randomizing between multiple different audio files, but always picking up in the same place within the audio file so that the riff, so to speak, remains consistent, but through multiple different sound design choices. And then because they are now printed to audio and, placed into the arranger view, I can now work with them as objects and not loot. Like I can keep what I've created and play around with it. So it's quote unquote random, but it is now fixed random. So anyway, these are just some approaches to add spice to what you're doing, and I hope that's interesting to you. If there are other interesting things that you'd like to know more about, let me know. All right, later.